You know what's up today. If you don't know, then you're about to know soon. What's up today is the big post from Blizzard about how they intend to make loot work in the raid of Dragonflight. This is quite important because they are moving away from personal loot. They are coming up with something completely different, with a new type of basically group loot in the raid, but there are also even more changes. The split item levels, boss to boss to boss, the new mini bosses in the trash to give BOE, and they're even mentioning about BOE weapons. So there's quite a lot of interesting stuff that they are trying to play with. So let's go over, and I'm going to read for you, because you guys can't read, what Blizzard is saying they are thinking on bringing in the first raid, in the first tier of Dragonflight. Now, the obvious first. These are things we already knew about because Blizzard mentioned them, which was group loot and loot trading. While inside Vault of the Incarnates, group loot will be the only method of loot distribution. You're gonna have a need button, a greed button, and that's it. And the other known part was the loot trading. While inside the raid, all item level restrictions are removed entirely. This means that even small item level upgrade increases are going to be just fine without having to worry about who's got enough item level to be eligible for trading, etc, etc, etc. That's something that was mentioned weeks ago, but we didn't know more than this. One is the item level tier. Now, from the data mining, we thought this was the spread of item levels in the raid. It actually changed, and now we know for sure because Blizzard is telling us. It's not about data mining, it's not about looking at numbers from the database of the beta build. This is actually Blizzard telling us. There are going to be 3 tiers of item level. The lowest one is going to be 389 base item level for normal, and will drop from Eranog, Primal Council, Senat, and Taros, which are the first 4 bosses leading up to the end wing bosses. This would be like saying that in Sepulcher, the first tier of item level is in Guardian, is in Dosen, and in Prototype Pantheon, but stops before Lihuvim, and then in Skolex and Zymox, but stops before Alondrus. Then the second tier, 395, 6 item levels higher, is going to be the intermediate tier for the end wing bosses. In this case, it's Dathia, Ascended, and Kurogrim Totem. In Sepulcher, it would have been something like Lihuvim, Halondrus, and Anduin are the intermediate bosses with the increased item level, and then the last tier, 398, 9 item levels higher than the first tier and only 3 item levels higher than the intermediate tier, is going to be left for the last bosses. In this new raid is just 2, Broodkeeper, Diurna, and Razgazeth, and of course in Sepulcher it's as it is now, Lords of Dread, Rigelon, and the Jailer. And then point out that these item level increases will stay within the plus 13 gaps of the different item level tiers. So normal will start at 389 and finish at 398, and then you have heroic starting at 402 and end at 411, and then mythic is going to start at 415 and end at 424. That's the idea they are planning with these item level tiers. And I think that up to this point most people can agree. Blizzard points out that for a long time we have observed that while players love the challenge, they felt weird that when you meet some walls, some cock blocks like Alondrus, like Painsmith Raznal or Sludgefist or Council of Blood, that these bosses were significantly harder than the previous bosses, yet they didn't get equal rewards, right? Yes, in Sepulcher, technically, you get to Alondrus, you get to Lihuvim, you actually get a tier piece, right? That was kind of the reward. Then again, you have the Catalyst. Then again, you have a system to bypass that. You have the Great Vault, which would also give you tier sets anyways, so it wasn't nearly as much of a reward increase. Instead now, the reward is gonna be there all the time because it's gonna be a flat item level increase on those bosses. What is also interesting is the part about unique drops. Additionally, we are experimenting a number of bosses that possess just one item intentionally higher item level, usually a +6 or a +7 from the boss's normal table. So he's going to have 5 or 6 standard items for that boss, and then just one, which is the equivalent of basically a Titan Forging. A fixed Titan Forging, predetermined Titan Forging. So that item will always Titan Forge when you loot it. They point out, we have a few things we are hoping to accomplish with this system, retain some excitement from early bosses that groups typically master very quickly, so they still have a chance to give you an increased item level piece of gear, give more long-term goals for difficult encounters, make a larger push towards having item level accurately reflect the power of a particular item. They say that at the moment they aren't planning for all of the 8 bosses of Vault of the Incarnates to have one of these special items with higher item level, but that's something that could change in the future. Now, there is something players are wondering about. Okay, you give one particular item more item level, but here's the thing. If you make a plate item with higher item level, you're going to exclude everyone that can't use plate. If you're giving a trinket with strength, you're also going to exclude everyone that can't use a trinket with strength. So how are you going to go about deciding which of these items you choose to have higher item level? Blizzard is saying they are already planning on having a pair of special rings from Eranog and Diorna. So rings can be used by all specs and classes, depending on the secondary stats they have and the special effects they are going to have. That's good. The second one is an Omni-stat trinket, so strength or intellect or agility, depending on your spec, which is also good because it can be used by everyone. Of course, then with a feature that many trinkets have had before, the effect that gets stronger with more copies. More players using the same trinket, making it stronger, right? We have gotten this for quite a while now. And that's all good. What triggers me is the third one they are planning, a special bow from the Storm Incarnate herself, Razageth. Again with hunter weapons? Really? Couldn't you have made a staff or casters? No, a bow. There is one class in the entire game, not even everyone in that class, because survival won't even use that weapon, so it's gonna be 2 specs out of 38 that can use a bow, and you still choose a bow. That triggers me. I don't want to see it again. We have seen this before multiple times. Please stop. Just don't have a bow. Just have a 2-handed weapon. The Gavel of the Arbiter, you know, the Jailer weapon was already a good one for 2-handed users. You have the Dagger one for rogues, so just go for either a staff for casters or a 1-handed sword for demon hunters, maybe for outlaw rogues, for frost death knights, etc, etc. That could be the other option. Just not another bow, please. Lastly, the big point that is quite different from before is trying to address a dreaded point for raiders, which is the trash. Oh my god! Blizzard really went down this really dangerous rabbit hole in Shadowlands with the way they developed the trash. So, what's Blizzard doing to address this very annoying problem? 1. Bind on equip items, they say that regular non-boss enemies, so everything in the raid that's not a boss fight, within raids will no longer have a chance to drop a bind on equip item. Wait a second, that's fucking awful. They are just removing them altogether. Hold on. Instead, lieutenant enemies named mini-bosses throughout the raid will have chances to drop them instead. These would work like lieutenants do in current WoW, where you're only eligible to receive loot from them once per week. You know, the ones with way more HP that you kill and give you some loot, some cosmic flux, the rep token, right? Those guys are the lieutenants in between bosses. BOEs would become scaled with group size like regular bosses do. This would guarantee a set number of BOEs each raid per group, assuming you're full clear in the instance. Lastly, we would be placing more important items, so more important BOE pieces, into the BOE pool, okay? What does that mean? More important? This could be anything from weapons to higher item level pieces to make them more worthwhile to raiders. So the idea is that, okay, you start the raid, you get through the first, second, third, and fourth boss, and you get traditional BOE pieces. Then you get into the 5th and 6th boss and you start getting increased item level dropping from the BOEs, and then the 7th and 8th boss are going to have increased item level and possible even rarer or stronger BOEs like weapons. That is their idea. They say that this goal, the goal for these changes, is to reimagine BOEs by making the raid environment itself sort of a 9th boss. something that you're progressing alongside the boss progressions, with a guaranteed amount of extra loot to reward progressing deeper into the raid as the BOEs increase in item level or start getting juicier, like juicy trinkets or juicy weapons from BOEs, from trash mobs. And you will be able to get this simply by dealing with the lieutenant. You no longer have to start scouring the entire raid, killing every bat, every mossworm, every trash you can find. Now you know that the BOE is condensed into a single mini-boss every once in a while, a single lieutenant every once in a while. They finish pointing out that they feel like this is also an opportunity to make BOEs much more clear and understandable, make them an actual mechanic, an actual feature of the raid, rather than feeling like an afterthought, rather than feeling like, oh yeah, we have a couple of people late, let's go and kill some trash. This type of afterthought. I think, of course, without knowing how it actually is going to play out, this looks like a much better idea for BOEs. As I said, we need to see the numbers. Is it going to be 2 BOEs per raid? Is it going to be 8 BOEs per raid? What do they mean by item level increases? Or what do they mean by juicy things like weapons? Is it going to be a situation where somehow there is going to be the weapon for casters that will be best in slot from the trash? And then there is, of course, the talk about the market. We are still talking about BOEs. We are still talking about things that can be sold for gold. So how is that going to impact the market of these type of weapons and gear that you can find in the raid with this new rework of professions, which will also give you a lot of high item level pieces that you can obtain? So that's still have to come all together. We still have to know once all of this is combined how it's going to play out. Definitely it looks like a much better effort to make trash mobs much more viable and valuable in the raid, as well as the loot itself. Of course, there are plenty of players who still very much enjoy personal loot. There are still very many players who will lament the fact or even cry the death of pugs because there is not going to be personal loot anymore. Many players seem to be worried about, for example, with group loot in pugs, what's gonna stop assholes, what's gonna stop mean players or maybe even just clueless players from constantly needing on everything? If something pops up in my feed of loot, I'm gonna click need. You know, it's a pug, I don't know you, I don't care about you, I'm just gonna need on everything. Does it matter that you are a haste mastery user and the ring you are needing is crit and verse? No, it's a pug, I'm just gonna click need. That's what players seem to be more worried about when it comes to the loot system. I think it's mostly psychological. It's psychological because personal loot completely removed the possibility of you seeing any of this behavior. Personal loot is literally right click on the boss, you either get the loot or you don't, period. I don't think anything changes with group loot. The only thing that changes is that you get to see how players behave, which might put you in a worse mood, which might make you more annoyed, but effectively nothing changes. With personal loot, you have 4 players getting loot. With group loot, you have 4 players getting loot, except with group loot, you will be able to get angry by seeing one of the players needing on a piece of gear where they already have the same item level, another player getting the piece of gear even though they stuck haste and the piece of gear had mastery, another player being a hunter, a survival hunter, needing a bow for off-spec. So the only change is that in group loot, you will be able to see all of that. While in personal loot, it was hidden. You couldn't see it. It was just right click, get the loot. You don't know the intention of the players. You don't know if they needed that, if they didn't need that. It's just automatic. In group loot, you will be shown what actually goes through the brain of these people, which will inevitably trigger you because many of these people will have sub-room temperature IQ and will annoy you. That's basically the most problematic change. For a little bit more of an in-depth, serious issue, even for raiders, for raid groups, is the fact that with personal loot, you could ignore shit pieces sometimes. Imagine you have healers in a boss, and imagine this boss drops a terrible healer trinket. What do? You set your loot spec as DPS. Now you have just completely removed that terrible trinket from the possible loot table. You are a tank, You have a terrible tank trinket, spec yourself as DPS. You are a player on a boss with a very powerful weapon, loot spec yourself into something that can loot that weapon. So that was the positive thing about personal loot, even for organized groups. Yes, you can't trade, yes, you can't master loot and organize the loot for your players, which is bad, but at the very least, you had this positive thing. You could try to game the personal loot to cut some terrible items out of the loot pool or try to increase the chances of getting good items by loot speccing properly. That's something that's going to go away. So now you have 6 items from a boss. One of these items is a bow. You have 1 hunter out of 20. That's gonna have the exact same chance of dropping as all the other things that might be needed by everyone. Even worse, you might not even have a hunter in your raid and that bow will still have a chance to drop. So that's the negative part about this type of loot system. Right? The fact that you can't game the loot chance as well with group loot or with master loot as opposed to personal loot. I think that's the main annoyance, which in the end, if you are an organized group, if you have friends, if you have a guild to run with, to raid with, you know that in the end, this is still the best way because it allows you to better spread around the gear for better progression for yourself, for your raids. So in the end, it's going to be a better choice, but personal loot had its pluses, its pros as well. But personally, I am even more excited about the potential change of trash and trash loot in the raid, as well as the different tier of bosses, of item level bosses throughout the raid, than I am about group loot. Mostly because I am a healer and I wasn't expecting on getting loot anyways. So it doesn't matter if it's personal, group or master looter, I'm generally not gonna get too much gear over DPS players anyways, so I'm not that touched by these changes. But let me guys know what you think about this situation for the loot changes coming in Dragonflight. For me, overall, it's a positive, it's a net positive of changes, but maybe you have different points of views, as you surely will. I've already seen many players disappointed in this change of personal loot, so let me guys know your takes on this. For now, I'm going to stop and leave you to the rest of your week, I believe, as it is starting now. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of my patrons for supporting me, for helping me to continue to produce content for WoW, as I very much enjoy getting deeper and deeper in the beta, getting more and more to play around with the specs and classes, seeing them grow like my little children into actual proper specs before the release of the actual game in a few months. That's always very exciting to do. Of course, for further support, you can like and comment down below, as well as subscribing to this channel as well, which is very, very helpful for myself and my growth in the WoW community. Lastly, we have the social interactions part, the general simping and the parasocial relationships you can have with yours truly. You can go along and follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right around here at these 2 links. Now, we have nothing more to say. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I just hope this BOE stuff is not gonna break too much the market and just skyrocket the prices for everything. When it comes to gear, I'm not very rich, you know.